everyone, my name is Faye and welcome to my channel. By the title of this video you can see that today we're talking about labour and delivery, and I just thought we'd do a really nice cosy chit chat type of video. Before we start, I want to put it out there that I'm not trying to put anyone off having a baby. I just wanted to share my experiences because I've had lots of questions about it, and I think that everyone should know both sides of what can happen in labour. Yes, obviously you can have amazing births and they go perfectly, but on the other hand things can go wrong. You just have to know that you're always in the right hands. My labour started, I was at my grandparents', I think I would have been about 39 plus 4 days pregnant when it started. He was due so soon and I was doing everything you can imagine to induce labour. I was eating hot curries, drinking raspberry leaf tea, I was bouncing on my pregnancy ball, anything you can imagine, and I was just so ready for him to be born. So I was sat at my grandparents with them, my partner Rob and my mum, and all of a sudden I could just feel this trickling, almost as if I'd wet myself. So I went to the bathroom to check what it was because I was sure I could not have wet myself. Absolutely not, that's all I thought. I've not wet myself. When I got there, I knew it wasn't wee. I knew I hadn't wet myself. So I made myself like a makeshift pad out of toilet paper because I didn't have any with me. And I went and sat back down in the living room. Why I did that, I don't know. I really don't know. But again, I felt this trickling, so I went back to the bathroom and my mum obviously realised something was wrong. So she made the start and she was like, right, we're going now, like we need to get going, stuff needs to happen. We weren't even leaving with her, but she made the first move so that we didn't feel uncomfortable, because I just love being at my grandparents'. When my mum came out of the living room, she was like, everything okay? You seem a bit off, something's not right. And I just told her and she was like, all right, that's fine. Like, what's happened? Let's go home, get everything sorted. So I got in the car with Rob. I was driving back to my flat and mum drove back to her house. She just told me, call me when you get home, make sure everything's fine. So that's what we did. And I drove home in the car with Rob next to me, and I just remember sitting at the train tracks because they'd come down, and I just looked over to him. I was like, so I think my waters have broken. Don't worry though, but I think they've broken.
He's like, what?
Yeah, it's fine, don't worry, we're all right.
Should you be driving?
So he was a little concerned, so I just carried on. We luckily only live around the corner from my grandparents at this point, so it took no longer than 10 minutes, if that, to get home. I remember calling the triage and just explaining to them what had happened, and they told me to come in for 5:30 to get assessed. They made me aware I will most likely be sent home because if my waters have broken and I'm not having contractions, I won't be ready at all for labour, obviously. We went there for 5:30. They did my assessment, and it was a trainee nurse or a trainee midwife doing my assessment. And she just looked at me and she was like,
I don't think your waters are broken. But no, you might have just had some discharge.
and I was like, I do not think that's discharge. I was like, I have not wet myself that much that I'm like going through pads every 20 minutes. Just
like, oh, yeah, perhaps I should get another midwife to come and look.
And I was like, that would be really helpful, please. So they got another midwife to come and look, and she was like, yeah, I think they have gone, but you're not having contractions, like you're not dilated at all, so he might not come yet. And I was like, he needs to be here soon, like he needs to come soon. So we're sent back home, which we knew was going to happen because they told us that when they told us that we'd have to come in for the assessment. For some reason I drove to the assessment and back, unsure why, because I could have gone into labour any minute. That was a really stupid idea on my part, but I mean, it's been and gone and I won't do it again. When we got home, I had a bath because I just wanted to relax, and I went to bed because I knew if I went into labour anytime soon, I'm going to need my rest. Rob stayed up for a little bit and played his PS4, just did his own stuff because there was quite a big chance that I wasn't going to go into labour yet. We just carried on as normal and I was just tired anyway, so I went to bed. I was asleep for about 3 hours and I woke up, Rob was just getting into bed, but I was starting to have mild contractions. So they weren't awful, but they were bad enough that I couldn't sleep. So Rob went to bed because I just thought there's no point in him being awake and me being awake because we'll then both be tired. The time was roughly midnight and I remember getting back into the bath because I knew of friends that had previous stories that getting in the bath was better for your pain relief. So that's what I did. I got in the bath and I sat there for about 45 minutes, I think, just kept adding in hot water to make it warm. And I just remember the contractions were just getting a bit more intense only a tiny little bit. Between the hours of 12 and I would say 3 o'clock, I just was switching between having a bath and sitting on my birthing ball because they're the only things I could do to help the pain. I'd walk around a little bit, bounce on my ball, and I remember I was watching One Born every minute because I thought hearing a baby cry would help bring my baby out. I don't know why. In this time, I'd also been calling the triage team to just make sure everything was fine because I was also losing my mucus plug and I needed to make sure everything was okay because I had not been informed about the mucus plug other than Facebook groups. That is the only time I'd ever heard about it, and from one of my friends. So after this time, my contractions were just getting more and more intense. It got to about 4 o'clock and then I called the triage team again because my contractions were a minute long and a minute apart. So I called the triage team, who then told me my contractions were not a minute long, they were only 56 seconds. What? I don't know how they could tell how long my contractions were because they weren't there, they were over the phone, but they told me not to come in because my contractions weren't long enough. So I continued bouncing on my birthing ball. Rob woke up about 6 o'clock, so I had just been having these contractions by myself for about 6 hours before he woke up, and he only woke up because he could hear me because I was in so much pain. At 6 o'clock when Rob woke up, he was the most supportive person. He was rubbing my back, he was getting me whatever I needed. I had a craving for ice very late on in my pregnancy, and so I just kept asking for more and more ice that I just crunched down on. It may have, I don't know if the fact that it was really hot and we were having a heat wave in the middle of that summer that made it worse, but I just wanted ice all the time. But again, my contractions went on and it got to about 8 o'clock and I called my mum and I said, I need you to come here. We called the hospital, I think around 10:30, and I just said to them, I'm coming in now because I can't take my contractions anymore, they're too bad. And they said, okay, that's fine, we'll have a bed ready for you when you get here in the triage section. I'm thinking, great, I can go there and they can give me some gas and air because that's what I need right now. I went downstairs and it took me about 20 minutes just to get out of my door and to the car because I was having contractions in between doing that. And they were so bad that I just couldn't really walk. So when we arrived at the hospital, my mum dropped us off at the front door and she then went and found a parking space and Rob held all my stuff so I could walk in. The triage point was all the way at the end of the corridor and it was quite a long corridor, so I walked all the way up there. When I got to the triage point, they put me in the bed and it was quite a while before they came and assessed me. I would say about half an hour, so I was having a lot of contractions in between this. They did come and assess me. They basically said, you're 1 centimetre. I could have cried. I think I did cry actually when they told me I was only 1 centimetre because my contractions were so intense that I was sure that I was going to be ready to push soon. However, because they knew that I was only 1 centimetre, I think they thought that I was like exaggerating a bit with how much I was in pain, which obviously I wasn't, which they found out why later on. They didn't offer me anything. They didn't offer me any pain relief at first. They just left me on the bed. Maybe half an hour to an hour passes and she comes back in and she asks me like, do you want any pethidine? Because that's like what we have to offer you. I was so out of it at this point because I was in so much pain and I just said, yeah, okay, I'll have some pethidine. I didn't even know what it was at first. They come out with this massive needle that goes in your leg and it's just like an injection for pain relief. They told me that it could make me a bit sick, so they gave me anti-sickness tablets as well, and they just injected me. Now, as far as I'm aware, when you put a needle in someone's body and remove it, you're supposed to put pressure on the point of where you've removed it to stop the bleeding. They didn't do that. This woman just pulled the needle out and let me bleed everywhere. There was blood all over the bed and there was so much blood everywhere, which is just not what you want to see when you're in labour and you're in pain. This pethidine did not help with my pain at all. It just made me so sleepy that I kept falling asleep in between my contractions for a minute at a time, which made me even more tired. They left me for another 2 hours because you can only have a pethidine shot every 4 hours. They left me for another 2 hours. They could quite clearly hear I was still in agony and I wasn't putting this on. So she came back, she basically told me I should go home, which I refused to go home because I said, I can't go home like this, I'm in too much pain, and it's been a long while since my waters are broken. By this point, it was already, my water started breaking at 3 o'clock the day before, and it was about 1 o'clock the next day. So nearly 24 hours had passed. From then, she told me my only other option was to have an epidural, and I cried. The ideal birth was to have a water birth, and it just didn't go to plan at all. So my only advice to you, if you're having a baby, going with the hope that it will go to plan, but the expectation that it won't, because you don't know the difficulties, like the things that could happen, like your baby might not be in the right position, you might not be able to handle the pain. Go to plan as always. This lady then does another assessment of me and realises I have not dilated anymore at all. Contractions have only got worse. At this point, she wondered what was wrong because she could hear I was in pain now. She knew I wasn't exaggerating, and she felt where the baby was, and he was in such a funny position. His bottom was above my hip, so instead of like gravity pulling him down, pressure on my cervix, he was putting pressure on my hip bone, which is why I was in so much pain. So they realised he was on top of my hip bone and he wasn't putting any pressure down. He was in the wrong position, basically. Anyway, after my mum came and spoke to me, I agreed to the epidural because I didn't really feel like I had much other choice. I was in agony, like I could not go on anymore. The pethidine was doing nothing to help. I was not dilating. 24 hours since my waters had broken at this point. I was wheeled into to give birth. Epidural on, they gave me a cannula, and I was also oxytocin, which is the drug they give you to like induce you. So because my cervix wasn't dilating, they needed to induce me to make it dilate, because they knew that he wasn't going to put any pressure down, dilate it any further. So that was my only option. When they put the cannula in me, I was in so much pain. I remember telling the nurse, that hurts, like it hurts. And she just kept telling me, no, it's just uncomfortable. I remember my mum coming in because she'd gone out to go and do something. And as soon as she walked in, the nurse just went, she keeps saying it hurts, but it's not, it's just uncomfortable. I knew I was in pain from it. I went on because I couldn't be bothered to argue because I kept telling her, and she just kept ignoring my epidural by this point, and I had the oxytocin put in. So they were just sort of waiting for everything to numb. My body reacted to it in a very strange way. So I couldn't feel any pain, which was brilliant. I couldn't feel any pain, but I could still get up and walk, and I could still feel when I needed to go to the toilet, which they thought was really, really strange because you're not being able to do that. With an epidural, the majority of people have a catheter because you can't feel when you need the toilet because it numbs you. I was very glad that I didn't have to have a catheter put in because I really didn't want that. That was one thing I didn't want. In labour for about another 6 hours before they came and assessed me again. When they assessed me, I was only 4 centimetres. They basically said, you know, if this doesn't get the ball rolling and we're not going, we're going to have to give a C-section. And I just didn't want a C-section. Not that there's anything wrong with C-sections, my birth had already gone so differently to what I wanted it to. But again, they went out and they came back. However, I honestly cannot remember much longer it was, but they came back and they assessed me again, and the midwife said, if you do not dilate 10 centimetres within the next half an hour, we're going to have to take you for the C-section because of the risk of infection. The baby's heart rate was dropping and I was showing loads of signs of infection, so I was shivering, but I was sweating. I was so hot to touch, but I felt so cold. Luckily at this point, like my cervix was really, really soft. It was ready to go, and I was about 9.5. But she came back half an hour later. I was so happy because she did the assessment and she said, you're 10 centimetres. Another lady came in, another midwife who knew I'd had an epidural, who knew I was on oxytocin. She said to me, you need to push with every contraction. Like, I've had an epidural, I cannot feel them. I don't know if she'd just forgotten or if she was just having one of those days. They told me when to push. He came out quite quickly, so 5 pushes at most, and he was out. My plan, once he was born, was to wait for the umbilical cord to go white, which just means that all the blood and all the nutrients from the placenta is drained out of it and into the baby. Unfortunately, because of such high risk of infection, they literally had to cut it and take him and assess him to make sure that he was okay and make sure I was okay. The other thing was I was very close to a hemorrhage, so I had lost a lot of blood, and I would just remember looking up and there was like 10 people in the room. My mum and Rob were like sat the side, and I just remember sort of my mum came over to me to make sure I was okay. I think she was just sort of trying to take away from the fact that there was so many people in the room, because I was on so many drugs, I just didn't really know what was going on. Luckily though, we were both fine, there was no infection. It was brilliant. I was given Theo, and he was a really big boy. He was £9.4, born at 24 minutes past midnight on the 20th of August. So a day before his due date. I was just so happy to have him in my arms. It's just a feeling like no other. Never explain it. It's just such a surreal feeling. I obviously didn't get to hold him for that long before they had to stitch me up, and they had to manually compress me to make sure that I wasn't losing any more blood. All in all, I was in labour for about 33 hours. So when people tell you that you're young, so your labour will go really nicely and smoothly, don't believe them, because it's not always true. That is my birthing story. I was so thankful to the midwife that was there afterwards, because she was so helpful to me, but I was so put off of the hospital when I arrived, because they didn't believe me. They thought I was over exaggerating, and I just didn't feel like they were very helpful to start with. And I think sometimes they forget that it's the first time that a lot of women have ever gone through this. They may do it every day, but I've never done this before. Another thing that no one told me through the whole of my midwife appointments, any of my scans, that when I was breastfeeding afterwards, not even whilst I was breastfeeding, after, like, I'd breastfed, and then I think Rob was there actually, and he was holding Theo, and I remember having these awful pains, like I was having contractions again, and I called the midwife, and I told them I was in so much pain. They didn't even explain it to me what it was then, and they basically told me, we can't do anything else for you, we have to wait for the doctor to come to have anything else. I was honestly gobsmacked. Should have been told that this is what happens, but no one mentioned it. So what happens is that, especially when you breastfeed, I think it may happen anyway, but when you breastfeed, your body releases the same hormone it does as when you're in labour, because it's like compressing your body back to normal, because obviously there's like this huge gap gone, and you've got a massive wound from where your placenta was, so it like compresses, which gives you the same feelings as contractions. But no one will tell you that. So that's my labour and delivery story. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, be sure to leave them down in the comments, and make sure to subscribe to my channel.